you or someone you care about struggling with anxiety, depression, or trauma, discover how the OCTAVE'S method goes beyond traditional therapy to heal the mind, body, and spirit starting today. Welcome to WellWaveNOW, your portal for actionable wellness insights. Meet your empowerment team. There's Breck, the healthcare disruptor, decoder of medication complexities, and a community and integrative wellness expert. Dr. Bob Levine, renowned brain researcher and national leader in drug-free pain elimination. And I'm Tim Daniels, wellness plan manager, builder of personalized wellness approaches as unique as you are to optimize your wellness with expertise in pulse electromagnetic field therapy. Together, we are your wellness catalysts, committed to elevating your health, enhancing your functionality, and optimizing your performance at every life stage. Our objective is to provide you with innovative strategies to boost your happiness and unlock your body's full potential. WellWaveNOW, where timeless wisdom lights your wellness path. Joining us today is Tonya Octave, a licensed clinical social worker with over 20 years of experience, providing integrative mental health services specializing in anxiety, depression, and trauma. Tonya is the creator of the groundbreaking OCTAVE'S Method, which uniquely blends psychodynamic therapy, cognitive behavioral techniques, and evidence-based holistic practices like mindfulness, nutrition, and hypnosis therapy. Her credentials extend beyond her practice. She's a thought leader in mental health innovation, a speaker on integrative care, and a dedicated advocate for addressing the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. Tonya's work has transformed countless lives, offering new hope to those seeking comprehensive mental healing. Welcome, Tonya.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to have you here with us. And I really like that. I think as our buddy and colleague Breck says, we are spiritual people, beings living in a physical experience. So I really like that spirit, body, mind, and spirit approach you have there to it. But what I want to do with this is let's begin by understanding the scope of this challenge. And, to that aim, give me your fill time. You've like 20 years of experience doing what you're doing currently. And then beyond that, in other aspects, what are you seeing the nature of the challenges that are being faced there? Are the numbers increasing? And are numbers increasing by different age groups in terms of what you're dealing with?
Well, I think we're all kind of seeing it. When we were children and we grew up, we may have known people who had ADHD. Now we probably are impacted even in our own families with that type of symptom presentation. We may have heard about people who had depression, and now we're all kind of experiencing it in some level. So even in a practical way, we are all kind of seeing it more so in an intimate way and experiencing it versus in this broad category. Like it used to be those people. Now it's infecting us, and it's affecting us in like these massive amounts. We went from this idea that someone would go and talk with let's say a psychiatrist, and they would lay on the couch, and it would be maybe for specific problems that you may be dealing with in terms of depression. Now, what we use in terms of our categorization of mental illness is what people call it, went from a small book to a very thick book. And the illnesses keep getting added onto and added onto. We're going in a different direction. We're not like getting rid of things. We're not curing things. We're not making things better for people. And I think we could all attest to that.
Why do you think that is? I just got to ask you that question.
Why I think it has a lot to do in terms of our food. So the food has, in terms of the nutrition that we're putting into our body, we're not putting food in our body that is detoxifying or nutritious, building up the cells so that cells can be healthy and move throughout the body. We're not exercising, we're not moving our body, we're kind of sitting and now we're going to be sitting even more with the invent and the advancement of technology. We're not having social engagements and interactions where we're being playful. We've removed laughter in the adult life. We're not even laughing as adults. So there are a lot of things that accumulate. The body can only do so much and handle so much. And it does a great job. It's done an exceptional job to keep us alive as long as it has, but it can't sustain us if we keep going down this path.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, good points. Good points there, Tonya. And I also think there's also some other external things that people have stressors of different types, throughout history. But there are some things now that I think people are facing, especially the young, that weren't faced before. I grew up in gun country, and in Nebraska, and I never worried about my classmates bringing a gun to school and trying to shoot at me. And we just had another one yesterday right up in Wisconsin. Just there all the time. And with a second grader having to call 911 saying there's an active shooter in there. So I think you've got that. And then now there's a whole debate on climate change, but at least whether or not climate change is real or not real. There's so much talk about it and so much talk about when someone has a big storm that it leaves an impression on people. So I think and then I think your thing on socialization as well too. I love social media. I love Zoom. I love what it's done for me and done for my business, being able to reach out and do things more conveniently and not having to commute as much. But it is a different type of interaction. I think all those things, can take away that last part can take away from some of the, like you said, the dynamics, the sense of community and sense of involvement with people.
And I definitely appreciate what you're saying. And this is so important in terms of when we think about like mental wellness. And the idea is like this war zone. Is the war zone that we grew up in the 1960s different than the war zone our kids are growing up now? And it makes me think of perception. How are we perceiving things? Are we perceiving things like growing up where they're shooting outside because of gang activity any different? It's still triggering something in my body. I'm still going into fight or flight or fawn or freeze or whatever reaction that is to try to stabilize and balance things. So my body is still having a response. But yes, are the numbers increasing? Yes, suicide rate is increasing among young people, particularly among young African-American boys. They're more lethal in terms of what they're doing, especially with the onset of COVID. People who have more of a extroverted personality are struggling more when they're told to stay at home and social isolate. Those weren't comfortable places. So it's like another form of trauma that we're creating for people as we continue to, as people say, advance in the world, but we're not taking care of people's mental health with this advancement. We're putting it off to the side and putting more things are more important in that sense.
And then I used to, I don't know if we ever talked about it a little bit before. I also ran, so I go both into the extremes. I also worked at a home care agency for the elderly and ran that for 8 years. And I even saw among the elderly a change, not as much family around, not as traditional staying with, living with the immediate family, being cared by immediate family, interaction with, or family now more distant. I saw them being affected by the anxiety and depression and changes and a sense of not being in the as much in the older and times past as being a respected elder. Now they were being kind of tasked, put to the side there. So there's a lot of things. And so I think it's hitting both. You can talk about people in between. I think it's hitting both extremes as well. Go ahead, Breck.
No, I just had the $64 million question here, right? We know what the barriers are. How do we break the cycle?
Well, I think one of the things is what I created, which was the OCTAVE'S method. So I'm a psychotherapist. I've been in practice for over 20 years. And I'm saying, well, what's going on here? How can I help people? Because traditional forms of psychotherapy, like with Freud or his daughter Anna, or even using like developmental models from Erickson, those things weren't working for the modern world. So what do we need to attend to? And that's, I think, what that led to the development of the OCTAVE'S method, which included things about nutrition. But this wasn't necessarily about sending someone somewhere and saying, go talk to a nutritionist. I became a nutritionist. I became a holistic nutrition because I knew the value of how the unconscious and subconscious mind works when it comes to food. And sometimes people will say, cut off a toe before you ask me to give up dairy, because that's how deeply embedded it is in the thoughts. You have to use an integrative approach. We have to change in the healthcare as our society changes and advances. We have to advance and know like these lives are important.
Well, you mentioned,
go ahead, Dr. Bob.
You mentioned a multimodal approach, which is really critical. And I think that's been needed from the very beginning. It's never been not needed. It's always been needed. And I think it's just becoming more, we're becoming more aware that that's really critical, having a multimodal approach to all these conditions we're talking about.
Yeah. And you mentioned your approach, but do you think overall there may be some systematic issues of maybe access or lack of training with our traditional providers today?
So there's definitely access. Most mental health is governed by the insurance companies, and they set the regulations in terms of who can get care and what are the limits to that. So you have to be sick enough in order to get help to go through the insurance company. So they're really kind of guiding and setting the rules, not the individual, which is what it was intended for. If I feel something is going on with me emotionally, I should be able to freely choose someone to get help. But now that there are perimeters, you have to stay within the state. You are only provided certain providers. The education of the providers, although they are educated in terms of having licensure and they go to different schools and they have to get CEUs, but even those are within a certain frame. Rarely do we have options where we can get CEUs from outside sources like dentistry. How important is oral health in terms of depression and making that connection, right? Like we don't get those type of connections.
One thing, I want to step you back there for a second. You mentioned CEUs. Explain to our audience what those are and why they're important.
So CEUs are our continuing education units, and there's a certain, based on whatever your license is, as a licensed psychologist, a licensed clinical social worker, or a licensed marriage and family therapist, there is a certain amount that you get probably every 2 years. And that organization, wherever you belong to, will say where you can go based on an approval. And so they've already have an approval saying that you can go to these places. These can be the hours that you get. And then you send that back to the organization so that you can be considered to be practiced ethically by their standards.
Yeah, thanks for explaining that. And, you mentioned a big barrier is the insurance, whether or not they are going to cover it. Is that a bigger issue than even maybe some of the social, stigmas that somebody is, needing mental health?
Well, now the stigma, because a lot of people in the entertainment industry have come out and say, I'm in therapy, I support mental health. You've had athletes, you have actresses, you have musicians that are coming out, which really kind of guides a lot of the younger people in terms of getting help or wanting to get help. The problem is now all of the young people are saying, well, I'm depressed and I'm suicidal and I need services. And then now you're going to have there may be more of a demand than what we can provide in terms of having, educated therapists and clinicians available to provide the treatment.
Yeah, that's a good point, Tonya. I think that resonates with the younger crowd, right? But maybe more of our seniors are the, rub some dirt in it kind of mentality, right? And, I'm hosting my in-laws this next couple of weeks. And I know that was kind of my, at least my mother-in-law's thought process was that, oh, no, no one needs therapy. You need to work it out on your own, take care of your own issues. But it is such a need for all ages. And I would even say, especially for our seniors who might have that problem with the stigma, right?
Yeah. And Breck, think about it. Wouldn't it be a nice space to where you can go at least for an hour a week and reflect on your life? If we talk about self-care, why not? Don't we all deserve at least 1 hour? We all live busy lives. We all are multitasking. We all are trying to do this and that and trying to function in this world and survive through this world. If we could just all have that 1 hour a week, sometimes you may need even a little bit more than that, and that's absolutely okay, to really reflect on what's going on and for someone to listen. Because how many people do you have in your life that really don't listen? Think about the people you're married to, think about your kids, think about your parents, think about all of the people in your environment and coworkers. They're like, sure, but then can they really recite back to you? Or do they want to give you advice that leads you in a whole nother direction? Therapy is your space that is safe, that is confidential with some exceptions, but it's your space to help you grow in the way that you want to grow so that you can be seen and feel value to yourself. So it's more, I will say, more about the internal experience, not the external experience.
Okay. So you mentioned there, Tonya, going someplace and having therapy an hour to talk, but you also alluded to earlier that the OCTAVE'S method was different than regular talk therapy, and you started talking a little about nutrition and other parts of it. So with the understanding now the range of the challenge and the fact that stigma has been overcome in some parts of the population, but still there amongst the elderly and older population. But talk about what's different about, give us the full OCTAVE'S method. Give us your full secret sauce there. What are the components of what really makes it completely different from traditional talk therapy type of thing?
Okay. So when I was in my 20s, I was still, going to school and studying psychology and trying to figure out some child stuff. And then I got in a relationship, fell in love, didn't work out, went to a depression, cried for about 7 years. And I was doing some things. I was doing a little bit of therapy here. I was maybe a little vegetarian for a year or so here. Maybe I would work out, but I would never have an integrative approach. So as I started to kind of figure some of this stuff out and read and research and stuff, I said, oh, we need an integrative approach here. We need more than just what we're traditionally doing. And so that is what kind of pushed the OCTAVE'S method, which is a simple way to understand using my last name to help people as a reminder so that it can be a subconscious thing and happen more automatically. So, it's observation. It is about spiritual health. It's not about like you have to identify with the religion. And some people don't even necessarily identify with spirit, but it's to give you the space that if you want to talk about things that you can't talk about in other conversations, because people may say, oh, you're schizophrenic or you're delusional or you're hearing or seeing things. This is the space to explore what spiritual health may mean to you. The other part is, C is for compassion. And I call this ego health. And usually there's three parts of the ego, the id, the ego, and the super ego. And it's how do you really enjoy and appreciate who you are and have compassion for that is by spending time with yourself, being patient, and allowing this to kind of navigate like how you learn about yourself through your ego health. And then the other part is therapy. And although I'm a proponent of psychotherapy because I think that it can be helpful, for people, I say engage in healthy therapeutic activities. That might be gardening for some people. For lawyers, that might be reading very dense materials because you can get lost in that zone and things just kind of fall in place after that. So it's engaging in activities that can be therapeutic. And then I talk about and I talk about animals. And I think animals, particularly pets, are so important because they can really tap into your behavior. Your animals, like some people will say, well, I think my animal speaks my language. Well, really, they're understanding your behavior. They observe everything that you do. And most of our communication is subconscious. So they know the truth. Verbally, we express all kinds of things that has kind of false things that come out of it. Another part of the animal part is the laughter, which I talked about. Kids laugh over 3,000 times a day. I think adults are like under 300. It releases these hormones. It helps to control things in terms of dopamine and serotonin. And it's something that we should be doing every day, not just once in a while. And we lose that as an adult. So it's kind of, and I'll distinguish in the book the difference between being playful versus being like childish, right? And so like we want to be able to be mature and operate in the world, but we want to be able to laugh at things in the world so that they can help us to heal, not to hinder us. V is for Victos, which is nutrition. And I'm a big proponent on bringing foods into the body, organic, that are detoxifying. So a lot of bitters that help control symptoms, if not eliminate. People have been, there's even some psychiatrists that have been able to treat what we would consider some of the severe diagnosis like schizophrenia, psychotic disorders with just nutrition alone, so that this becomes another alternative than other people assuming that you have to always go to psychotropic medications. So nutrition is vital. E is for exercise and moving the body, and however you do it. If you're not even, if you have limited mobility in terms of like your legs or your arms, how else can you move other parts of the body and giving yourself freedom to do that? We are so disconnected from our body that we don't know what it's like to like raise our hands and to breathe differently as we do that because we're so disconnected. But to be able to embrace that and move along in that is healing in and of itself. And then the last part is S, which is the like relational help, socialize. And a lot of it is about relationships. Most people come to therapy because of some relationship concern. They go because they feel some way about relationships or someone has told them who they are in a relationship with that they need to be in therapy. The socialized part, though, is about the relationship with yourself. How do you get to know who you are in this journey as you're traveling through it? What triggers you? What makes you go in a reactive state versus in a responding state? So it's getting to know yourself. And I often say relationships are a mirror. And sometimes you don't want to look at that mirror because it's painful and it's sad and it's hard. But as you go through this journey, you learn that that mirror can be very beautiful. And wouldn't it be beautiful to look at yourself in the mirror through the eyes of others and see the beauty just like sometimes they see in you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, that's so amazing and so holistic, right? That you're encompassing all that. Can you put your finger just on one thing that really differentiates or really moves the needle for you with the clients that you work with?
So in terms of one of the things is going to be the relationship, to get people to feel safe and comfortable and that I can be, based on their experience and interacting with me, trustworthy. So I show up. I practice the OCTAVE'S method. When things come up in my life, I said, okay, am I doing the OCTAVE'S method? Am I breathing? What did I eat today? Did I move my body? Do I need to go into meditation? Am I laughing? So I practice it all of the time, not just when things are difficult, but when things are just, I practice it every day. So I don't have to associate a negative thing about it, that it is just a part of my embodiment of who I am. And when people see that, I think they feel that and sense that. And then that can be a guide, because the person who can heal you is you. I believe I'm just a guide to kind of help you through that process, because I've learned some things along the way that I want to share.
And that's so amazing too that you created the acronym out of your own last name, which is a lot of fun. I can only say that the RICE method has to do with first aid, right? Rest, ice, compression. What's the last one? Elevate. Yeah.
Okay.
Rice method. So that's the only thing I could. But man,
I can't do much with Levine. So
yeah, Levine, you're.
But you know what? There's some creativity there. I don't know. We might be able to come up with something.
I'm sure we could. With the four great minds that are on this call, I'm sure we could.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that you respond and say, now here's a thing that might be preeminent, but I also appreciate that, because it's kind of what we talk about here as well. And what Bob alluded to, I thought Bob was going to spend more time on his multimodal approach there, as he calls things, is that really what you've said here is there's not one magic pill. Relationships are important, but it's addressing all those things to really help you. It's the exercise, and we did a series on exercise on medicine, and part of it we talked about how you could do that. It could help with the elasticity of the brain as well, but we talked about exercise and how it helps in the production of endorphins, and also in the elimination of cortisol, this stress hormone. But you've got to, not to be repetitive what you went through, but it's really kind of our philosophy as well, that to address these things, multimodal, comprehensive, you need to do it very, very well, you need an end-to-end approach. But like one person who we had with us, and she was talking about how she recovered from the trauma of domestic abuse, and then plus the having had Graves' disease, was the fact that she didn't have to be perfect in all of those, but she had to make changes in all of those. And there was the little things that added up across the board and integrated that really, really brought her back, and then let her handle it.
I love that. It really is the integration.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you. Let's just say you have a patient who comes to you with anxiety, or so-called, I hate these diagnoses, anxiety disorder,
I call them symptom presentation.
Yeah, exactly. I deal with symptoms. I don't deal with, the diagnoses are interesting, but people get so hooked on them. So I deal with symptom alleviation. So what's your approach with somebody who comes to you with anxiety? What do you do?
I get to know them. I get to hear their side of the story and listen. And I spend a lot of time just listening at first, because before you can learn something, you have to understand it. And your life is complex. I often will use this kind of metaphor. Your life is like 1,000 pieces of a puzzle. And so they're all spread all over the places. It's going to take time to put the pieces of the puzzle. And sometimes you may want to start on the borders. Like, oh, but we should do the corners first, because at least the colors are matching up. Some of that stuff will stick with you, and some of it be like, no, let's just mix it around. Then we put the wrong pieces of the puzzle and get together. But in the end, that's what we're trying to get, is this beautiful picture where you know who you are, how you're showing up, and you're confident and loving of yourself in that process. And that's the 1,000 pieces of the puzzle that comes together in the end. So that's what I would start with, getting to know you. And then I'm going to start asking about, like, what are you doing in terms of like silencing the mind? How are you with patients? What are you eating? Are you including gluten in your diet or dairy? Are you eating anything organic? So that I know where we're going to start in terms of a frame. And then I'm going to gently and easily start guiding you. Once you start to trust me, then you're going to be curious. Then you're going to ask more questions, and then I'm going to give you some more information about ways to change. And then you're going to feel it. You're going to feel it in your body, these changes.
Do you see a common thread? I mean, I get it that everybody's different. They're everybody's life experiences are different. They've been impacted by different circumstances in their life. But do you see any common threads across your patients who come to you, for instance, with anxiety?
People are lonely. They're lonely. People are lonely. They don't feel like they're being heard. They feel insignificant, and that their life has little meaning. And I've heard this from all age groups.
So how do you help them shift that perspective? Because that's an interpretation of what's going on. I'm lonely because of this, that, and the other thing. So maybe I'm imagining you have to help them take a different view of what's going on in their lives. And if you do that, how do you do that?
I believe that their life is important. I believe that they came to my office for a particular reason, and it's going to teach me some stuff too. So I'm going to learn through the process, and their life is so important. If I believe that, eventually they're going to start seeing the meaning in their life as well, because it takes maybe one person to care, and that's how I show up.
Very good. Very good.
I love that.
And that's,
oh, go ahead, Tonya. I don't want to.
I was just going to say, that's not like in terms of scientific data. How can we prove that? How can we mimic that?
No.
That goes back to clinical training, right?
Yeah.
When you go into the doctor, you know within the first couple of minutes whether or not this doctor is going to be helpful or not. Most people make that judgment about people when they first meet them, even if they're walking across the street.
I wanted to go back to your puzzle example, because that really fits in very well with what I wanted to talk about next. And that's why certain elements that you have incorporated are traditionally left out of normal, or I don't want to call it normal, but traditional therapy, right? So you bring up elements of spirituality or even nutrition, exercise even. Those are things that aren't commonly covered in a general therapy session. Why do you think that is? Why, especially, let's touch on first the spirituality. Why is that left out?
Well, I think people ignore spirituality, one, because they're not really grounded in what their spiritual belief is. And then they feel like, well, if I'm a particular religion, I can't do anything else outside of that. And then will that be a conflict? My spiritual or religious beliefs don't need to come into the therapeutic room. This room is about your spiritual beliefs and where you are and where you want to go. And so I think as a clinician, that's part of the training. We feel that we're bringing that, and we're not grounded in where we are. So that is part of the hiccup, where the person treating is not grounded in that. And then there's this uncomfortability about exploring things beyond your own conception, exploring meaning, exploring purpose, talking about death and after death, or ideas of reincarnation. This is something that is foreign. We usually will refer out to somebody else. Why? This is this person's space for growth. Why not provide that space right here in this environment that's safe and confidential for them to do it? They can't talk about visions that they've had since kids to their teacher.
Yeah. So, and it just seems to be so taboo, right? And maybe a lot of that is coming from the training, maybe even from the educational system, where people are getting licensed as therapists, that it's just taboo to talk about anything that may be holistic in nature, that would include, nature or spirit or anything spiritual.
Tonya, wouldn't you say that the training of therapists is inside a particular box, and the therapists think that they need to operate mostly inside that box, and that prevents them from getting outside and trying other things like you've done?
Absolutely. Everybody's scared of being sued. Everybody's scared of something unethical or violation that may occur, because their training is limited, right? Like, oh, I'm going to lose my license. And granted, I've had similar thoughts too, because I am really outside of the scope of what is traditionally done in my practice. I get trainings from other places. I still participate in the minimal participation of trainings within my field, but most of my trainings come from outside sources. It kind of reminds me of this beautiful experience. I had a 7-year-old girl. Her entire biological family was died in a fire. And during my experience with her, she had a very quiet personality. My dog was there. I have a therapy dog that comes to session. And so she would just rub the therapy dog, and she would just cry. And we did this like for probably about 6 sessions. She would just rub and cry and rub and cry. And this was very healing. And then she wrote a letter to God. That was beautiful. Yeah. Nice. She was given the space after she felt something tragic was taken away from her to still know that she was important and could still connect spiritually to God.
Do you feel like you're a detective too? I mean, I feel like I'm a detective when I'm with all kinds of different clients with all kinds of different backgrounds. You have to figure out, like, you got the therapy dog, and you saw that was working, and so you cultivated that with her, right? And then for another person, it's something else, right?
I don't see it as a detective. I see it as magical. Okay. I arrive because I think whatever arrives for us.
Yeah.
And it's going to manifest itself in the way that it needs. You're going to reveal the things to me that you need to reveal over time. And as you start to trust me, the revealing is your ego is going to open up, and you're going to be more open because you feel safe enough to say these things about dreams that you would never say to anybody in public, thoughts that you had that you judge yourself about, that you think are awful, and you ridicule yourself, but it allows you to kind of, like what I would say, like liberate the ego.
So I have another question. Sorry, I have a lot of questions because I'm really tuned into what you do and I like it. So when somebody starts expressing all of these thoughts that perhaps don't serve them at all, what's your approach with that? You know, they're spewing out all these thoughts that they have that about maybe they're not good enough, or they don't deserve anything, or life's been treating them terribly, or whatever they are. How do you deal with that?
So the thoughts that don't serve them, I'm not sure. I think we hold on to thoughts that have allowed us to survive. So it has served them through a survival means. And then I kind of say, do we want to survive, or do we want to live a happy, blissful, enlightened life? So some of those thoughts, once we know that they're there, if we still need to hold on to them for survival, then we can do maybe some cognitive behavior. We can do some reframing. But sometimes we find out those thoughts we no longer need because we don't need to survive, because we've made some changes, and then that thought disappears. It goes from the subconscious mind into the conscious awareness, and then you make a decision about whether you keep it, if you need to hold on to it, or you let it go.
Yeah, when they start expressing that. Sorry, go ahead, Breck. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to mention that, there's certain things that, like you said, you give them the safe space. It's their time. It's their opportunity to open up. That, as taboo as some traditional sessions may be to get into the spirituality, it even seems like a bigger bridge to cross to get into nutrition. How does that topic come up?
Nutrition, I would say, is probably one of the harder. Let me reframe that. Nutrition, because we're born into families that teach us things about food, and food has a bodily response and an emotional response and a spiritual connection, because we have good memories. We may not be able to remember the details of Christmas, but we remember waking up and mom always cooked breakfast and everybody was happy, and we could have both good and bad memories about it. So I know that. I don't go in changing someone's diet. I go in to understand their diet and the difficulty with that. And along the way, I mentioned little things like, oh, have you ever considered maybe a vegetarian lifestyle? I never take things away. I introduce more. Let's get some more green vegetables in your life. Like, how can we encourage you more vegetables? One of the relationships with kids who are autistic. So if I had a mom and a mom had a child who was autistic, I'm going to talk about mold toxicity, and I'm going to talk about heavy metals. And I'm going to say, we need to get some green bitters in that household. You want your kid to kind of manage some of those symptoms, not necessarily a cure for that, but how can we do that? So I'm going to use whatever is working for that client to help enhance that house in a creative way using nutrition. Wow. And then sometimes I share my own story because I've had Hashimoto's in terms of a thyroid issue, and I no longer have had it. I've had some female things that I no longer struggle with, and that has been because of dietary issues. And so sometimes relating my personal things helps encourage people to know they have other options. They may not take my option. They may go through Western medicine, and that may be, but I want them to know, because I'm a trauma specialist, and trauma for me is when your choices are taken away or when you're only given one choice. In the medical industry, you get one choice. You're depressed, you get, I don't want to listen to medication, but you get something, right? I want to let you know, like, that could be an option. And then there's some other options that you could take too.
I'll list those medications. Just go to
Breck's our medication expert.
Healthcare disruptor out there. Let's go listen to Dr. Get on.
Well, lemon balm is a beautiful herb out there in terms of someone who is struggling with anxiety. It doesn't act the same way as if you go to a doctor and get it prescribed, where you may feel it immediately. But if you're consistently taking it along with some other stuff, and this is not necessarily a recommendation, but lemon balm is a beautiful herb to play with.
So a couple things. I'm going to be Dr. Bob today, because Dr. Bob hadn't asked this question.
Okay. Okay, Dr. Bob.
Yeah, I know. I just get so.
Tim really knows me. He knows what I'm going to come up with. He's just beating me to the punch.
Be Dr. Bob here. And if I start out, I want people to be happy. That's what Dr. Bob wants people to be happy.
See, when he's being me, he smiles. I love it.
I smile.
It's the exchange of energy.
That's right.
But a lot of things you pointed to is one, is that like, I know I don't think reading you don't like the term compliant. Like you said, you like to put things in front of people, but I'm going to use the term compliant because my home care world, it was tough to get the people who can be compliant with either taking medications that supposedly were saving their lives. So these changes that you add to people and add to them, give a little bit more on how the motivate and getting them to be self-motivated to want to do it. And then how you help them be compliant, in my term, long term. Was that a Bob question? That was a Bob question.
Yeah. That's really good. Yeah. I have another one to follow it up when she's done answering the first Bob question.
Okay. So kind of the compliance issue, and then I kind of hear a little bit about resistance. Resistance is a powerful tool. And when you think about the mind in the 3 levels, the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious, you're dealing with resistance. An outsider may say, this person is resistant to treatment. They're not following my recommendations. My frame is, these are your recommendations. How can I support you if we need to take baby steps to get there? Because I know how difficult it may be. Mm-hmm. So an example might be, if I'm working with someone who says they want to meditate, but they're having a difficult time meditating, I will talk about what could be a formal practice of meditation, but I'm probably going to talk about more informal processes. What can you do in a minute? Can you breathe? Can you put your hand on your heart, your hand on your stomach, and just breathe and maybe close your eyes and connect to the body, both with physical touch and with your breath? Can you do that? Can you practice that? Did you practice that when you were with your boss the other day and he was making you irritated? Can you go internal for just a few seconds, right? And so I don't see things like as a compliance issue. I see like, how can we navigate where you want to be in life and support a plan to get you there, and use these steps, what we may call baby steps, because sometimes the ego is okay with that, and getting you there. Now, sometimes things are a little bit more urgent. Sometimes you may have a disease state that is in the body. I may then take more of a drastic approach if I already have a relationship built with that individual.
What would that be? What's an example of, I'm curious, what's an example of a more drastic approach? Because while you're thinking about that, I want to ask this question. Let's say I'm a client, I come to you, I drink sugary drinks, just a lot of them all day long. I drink, energy boosters. I
drink raw milk when I shouldn't.
No. Listen, don't distract me from this. So let me focus on my question. I eat donuts. I'm about 30. I'm at least 50 pounds overweight. I'm not quite obese. I'm subjected to very, very close to adult onset diabetes, metabolic syndrome. The overweight, diabetic, cardiovascular disease. Those conditions which comprise metabolic syndrome, which is just a terminology for those. So how can you not take away? I'm going to challenge you a little bit, Tonya, because if I'm slamming sugar down like crazy, I mean, what are you going to do? You're not going to advise me to take it away somehow? I don't know. You tell me, because I want to know, because when I have clients that are like the person I'm describing, I want to get some advice on how to deal with those people.
So Dr. Bob, I've listened to you share some things going on right now. And what I hear is not only depression, but suicide. Help me understand how this is not a form of suicide.
No, I mean, it doesn't
that
occur
may
to
be
me.
an approach. No, I'm just saying, no. I'm using it as like a role play example.
Are you calling me suicidal, though? Are you really calling
as a fun role play kind of thing? Yeah. That would be a drastic approach, right? Yeah, like I'm going to go in, because some people don't know that they are killing themselves slowly over time, right? And so those things you described, to me, that's suicide.
Okay,
that's
so you're going to frame it like, hey, if you keep going this way, this is what your future looks like. It's your choice. If you keep going this way, this is how it's going to go for you.
And then I'm going to give an option. Yeah. And then I'm going to give an option.
Like, what if you tried this? How would that lead to a future, a better, improved life somehow, right?
My option is probably going to be hypnosis. And I'm going to talk about hypnosis. And I'm going to say, let's talk about all the myths out there and what that means. And I'm saying, well, hypnosis is going to work with the subconscious. Psychotherapy works with the unconscious.
Okay,
so we'll go back.
I have to interrupt here now, because I'm hoping you can explain to me the distinction between unconscious and subconscious. That's what I'd like to know, because I hear people throwing those terms around, and I don't think they create a distinction. So I'd love to hear your distinction.
Okay. So I have a beautiful 20-minute explanation that goes into all parts of the mind on YouTube, but I will talk about the three. The conscious awareness is what we are physically seeing, experiencing in terms of like I'm sitting right now in the present moment, right?
Yeah, we're talking.
That's about 12% of what goes on in terms of our memory. And then there's about 88%, which is subconscious. That means I have absorbed everything throughout my day. It would be an overload for my conscious awareness to do it. Yeah. So it sits and settles in the subconscious. From the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep, everything is absorbed.
So that's
conscious
100%.
present
That's
takes
100%.
away.
That's 100%.
So
what's left over from the unconscious?
The stuff from before then. The stuff from the past, the stuff that's connected to your genes, that's the unconscious work. The things that have been traveled in terms of family generational patterns, that is the unconscious work. That sometimes when it becomes conscious and it takes some work, that can bring insight into making decisions. So I often will say, people will say, well, what if I'm in treatment and I've been to other therapists and nothing's worked, but I still feel depressed? And I'll say, well, how do you know it's your depression and not great-great-grandmother's depression?
You know what I would say?
That's the unconscious work.
I would say you haven't used the Octave method. Let's get into the Octave method.
You haven't used the Octave method. That's right. That's right. Does that help understand kind of the three levels?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I want to come back to this part about this genetic transference. And I want to do a little more definition or example of that and how that comes about. But before we do that, I want to give Breck an opportunity to talk about our sponsor for today.
Yeah, I'm really excited about our sponsor today because I was one of those that Dr. Bob was talking about earlier. I kind of got hooked on those energy drinks because I'm not old enough to drink coffee. So that was kind of my get going in the morning was an energy drink. And I saw this product. Have you guys heard of this? NeuroGum? I saw this product. It was on the #1 podcast in the world. If it was good enough for Joe Rogan to get to all his guests, and they're not even a sponsor. They just love it that much. They just order it by the case. But this improves energy and focus. Natural, all natural with. I'll send you the information, Dr. Bob. But it's all natural caffeine, and they infuse it with vitamin B as well. But I've been off those sports drinks and energy drinks for a while now, and I've just replaced it with the NeuroGum. So really excited about this. They sent me.
I know when you did that because for the last month you have been really right on. And I know it was a month ago you started that.
That's got to be the key right
when he got off the raw milk.
Yeah, that too. Hey, but back to the show. Thanks, Tim.
I love the raw milk, Tim. I got to tell you, I love
That's another one. Bob likes the raw milk and likes to drink raw milk. And so
okay, can I tell it just a 30-second raw milk?
No,
you keep bringing up raw milk. I got to get out there with the raw milk.
No, I get to pick on you today without any response. So so she can work with you on the anxiety that I created you.
I'm going to get your phone number and call you, Tonya.
But I know it won't create an anxiety in you, Dr. Bob, because you're that self-aware person. You know yourself and you know how to handle it. You're resilient. So that's why I don't mind throwing things your way. But
thank you. Yeah.
So Tonya, I've heard this before on the transfer of generational challenges without people being aware of it. Tell me your view on how that happened. How do I inherit my grandmother's anxiety when I didn't know her? And so how's that come about?
Interesting question.
Like how you would know that it's your grandmother's, like distinguishing between
the fact I think you mentioned earlier, you see that. And how do you? I don't know if it's anxiety, but how do you know that it's your depression and not your grandmother's?
Okay, well, I have an idea. You didn't know your grandmother, but maybe as you became anxious, as you were growing up, your parents said to you, "Oh, your grandmother was that way." Maybe that's how you found out about it.
Yeah. So that's the question related to it. It could happen that way. Is how do if it is my grandmother's depression and I didn't know her, how did I get it?
So let's talk a little bit about attachment theory. And attachment develops between birth and 3. And this is how we attach as infants to whoever our primary caregivers. Essentially is they have to be good enough. If they are good enough, they meet our basic needs, they give us things that make our body feel comfortable, then we're going to have a pleasurable, if we feel safe with them, if we feel connected with them. And then when things don't happen in that the good enough, then other things start to develop, like an anxious attachment or an avoidant attachment, or if there's abuse or neglect, like that's another type of attachment. Those things kind of then will start to manifest itself. It starts to change the genetic makeup within the individual. They start repeating these relationship patterns over and over as they get older. And they grow up, and it's kind of like that idea, why do I keep dating the same person over and over? Because you're recreating, you're trying to work through something with that. At the same time, the body is changing, the cells are changing. It's just like with nutrition. In the past, we were able to eat things that were from the soil directly into the mouth without washing it. It would help our microbiome. We can't do that now because there's so many toxins that are not only on the vegetables, but now kind of even toxicity in the soil. Things will start to have this genetic change. Not only that, as an infant watches everything that caregiver does. So if that mom or that dad is anxious, that child is learning how to operate in a world in an anxious way. So then when that child then is triggered in a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, they may naturally go to that anxious spot, thinking that they're taking ownership of it and that it's theirs and not mom's. And that's how things get transmitted from generation to generation. It starts in infancy. Babies, that's all they do is they observe and watch what's in their environment. And those are the caregivers who are providing that for them. And then they start taking ownership of some of those characteristics.
Now, so let's go. I want to go back to, so we talked about the Octave methods. We talked about the integrated nature. We talked about how you work it. Give us, even if love to understand what happened to the 7-year-old that wrote the letter to God. Take us through where you've gotten some results with her or others that you're extremely proud of and think differ from what they would have gotten in traditional therapy.
So just to conclude with the 7-year-old girl, she was adopted. I saw her until about the age of 10, and then she just successfully completed. She went through the entire adoption process. I did some work with her and the adoptive parents. She had maybe like some things in terms of some anxiety with, like with school and peer relationships and working through that. But she had what we would consider a successful termination, and was doing relatively happy in a safe and loving environment. One of the stories that I can share is a case, and I'm going to change her name for confidentiality, but I'm going to call her Maria. She is of mixed race, Mexican and Caucasian, but she presents as Caucasian in the world. And she was struggling with a lot of anxiety. She had little ones that were kind of running around, and she was overwhelmed. And she found that she was very, very triggered a lot. Didn't have a lot of healthy relationships, but she actually came into therapy for something else. She came because she was forced by the courts because of an addiction. And like I said, I don't really treat addictions. And I told her that. But that really, when people are 2 years old, they don't say they want to be an addict. Something has happened in their life. And this goes to understanding someone's story where that became a coping strategy for her. We used the Octave's method. A part of it was her becoming more grounded throughout the day. So she didn't have like a formal practice. She had an informal practice. When she got in the car to drive the kids to school, she would sit. She would listen to soft music on the way to school. Before she came home after work and everything was chaotic, she would sit in her car and do a little meditation. That was part of her informal practice. And then with food, now the food was hard. The buy-in for the food for her was not directly with her. It was more of a roundabout way with her kids because her kids had some symptoms presentation going on with things. And she saw that their behavior was changing because she was doing things like making salads instead of getting hamburgers and French fries, especially Monday through Thursday, because she had more free time on the weekend and she would do things kind of outside of that. Fast forward, years later and stuff like that, like I still have maintained contact with her, but things are stable in her life. She feels like there's an overall satisfaction. She still has some fluctuations in terms of like jobs and feeling some way about her boss at times and stuff like that. But overall, she feels good. She did have one health concern, and that health concern was resolved. She had to do some things in terms of some tests that I recommended for women, like the Dutch test to test her hormones. She was in something we called, what most people will know of it as adrenal fatigue, but that's not the current language of it now. It's the hypothalamus pituitary axis dysregulation. And then people add other things like thyroid to that later on. But so with that, we did some adrenal work. So the adrenals are so impacted because when you're in stress or a long period of time, cortisol is just constantly shooting out, and you're in constant fight or flight. So we have to find ways to settle that. And so in that journey, she's been able to at least feel like healthy. She has energy throughout the day. That would probably be, one of the success stories that I would share.
That's amazing.
I could talk. I'm really fascinated by our conversation. I could talk for hours with you, Tonya. I'm wondering though, Tim and Breck, do we want to open this up to some questions at the very end of the hour? See if any of our people who are online have any questions. What do you think?
Yeah, if people have questions, they can certainly put them in and come through. Like we as we do that. But given where we're at a little bit, as people think about that, if they want to put anything in the chat in either TikTok or here with us on Zoom. So I want to take Tonya through a couple other things, which is number one, how do you scale yourself? How do you want to scale yourself? This has been very informative for people. How can people, what are different ways people can engage with you? And if they want to engage with you, how can they contact you?
One of the beautiful things that I have the pleasure of doing, I think a lot of things are beautiful, but this is also one of the other things I will add is I have a podcast. It's called Trauma in Social Work. And it's a dialogue between mother and son. Another thing that has never been done in the psychoanalytic field is we're supposed to keep things private. Well, my son asked me a lot of questions from the perspective of a young male in his mid-20s about how to apply these things in practical ways. And we go through the steps of the OCTAVE'S Method. And so that is one way of contacting me, going to my website, which is Tonya Octave LCSW. If you go to the website and you send me a message, I will send you a free link to my complimentary workbook that goes along with the book. And the workbook is a journaling exercises that you can do to kind of really start reflecting on some of the ideas in the OCTAVE'S method in terms of nutrition and exercise to get you kind of having that internal dialogue.
And that you will do that realm, you can do with people, you can do with people any place, anywhere, right?
So for psychotherapy, I can only provide psychotherapy in the states that I'm licensed. Thank you, government, California and Nevada. I'm licensed in 2 states. But if you wanted coaching services in terms of nutrition, meditation, or movement of the body, which is kind of like exercise, and certified in all 3 of those as a coach, or hypnosis, I can do those worldwide.
How accessible in the following manner are you, Tonya? Meaning, certainly that OCTAVE'S method is worth $1 million as gold. Does somebody have to have $30,000 to engage with you? How?
You don't have to have $30,000 to engage in me. I do have rates that are set based on whatever service that you would like to receive. Those rates I consider to be reasonable, and I actually consider them to be less than what is actually out there for people who are charging more. Because if you show up, you're indicating something to me. And like I said, I'm a guide. I'm here to share the information as long as you're willing to do the work. And it is hard work.
What's the most rewarding thing for you in what you're doing? You've been called to this, right? So what's the most rewarding to you?
I get to wake up every day and smile, and I love my life. I know who I am. I'm grounded. I know what my purpose is, and I'm balanced. I'm not infected by a lot of stuff that is happening externally, especially with other people in the helping profession.
Awesome. We sure appreciate you coming on and being a part of WellWaveNOW, and definitely need to have you back because there's so many different rabbit holes we could go down with your process because it is so functional, right? It's holistic and not just taking one approach. So I'd love to get into more of that details. But yeah, thank you so much for being here and being our guest today. And we're going to put your contact information in the chat as well, so that everybody will also be able to get in contact with you. And
I went to your website, Tonya, and all the information is also there too. And I went to your Facebook page, and there was a very nice thing about healing. Healing starts within. I forget exactly how you said it, but it was really great because that's how healing starts within, for sure.
It does. It does.
Right, beautiful. That sounds like Breck Rice. Healing, it's in you.
Yeah.
It's like this. Like the body wants to heal. We just got to get the mind out of the way.
Yeah, I like that. Well, we'd like to thank all of our listeners that are live on Facebook and here on TikTok, as well as our live audience here in the Zoom room. It's always a pleasure to have you here with us at the WellWaveNOW Show.